The silence hit me like someone had pulled the floor out from under my life. I didn't expect it to feel this sharp, this physical, like the air had thickened after I deleted everything. For years I thought noise kept me connected, but now the truth stood in front of me with its arms crossed. I wasn't afraid of losing updates. I was afraid of meeting myself without them. The quiet felt too honest, too direct, like it knew things I wouldn't admit. As the minutes stretched, something inside me trembled like a wire pulled too tight. I wondered if emptiness could heal, or if it only echoed everything I refused to hear. And in that first long breath without a screen glowing in my hand, I realized the real question wasn't why I used social media so much. It was what I had been trying to drown under all that noise. More than me. What I poured out soared to. The first morning without notifications felt strangely hollow, like waking in a room where someone had quietly removed all the furniture. I kept waiting for something to buzz, ping or glow, but nothing came. The silence didn't greet me warmly. It sat across from me like a stranger who knew too much. I moved through my morning routine with the uncomfortable awareness that I had no digital witness, no invisible crowd watching through a screen. I could feel every tiny detail of the moment. The cool floor beneath my feet, the soft weight of my sweater, the faint creak of the apartment settling. Without the fast rhythm of updates, time felt slower, heavier, almost elastic. I wondered if this quiet was healing or if it was peeling back layers I had kept safely hidden behind the noise of constant distraction. By midday, the phantom impulses started. My hand kept drifting toward my pocket, even though nothing waited there. It was unsettling to realize how automatic the motion had become, like a reflex built from years of reaching without thinking. Each time my fingers met emptiness, a small jolt ran through my chest, sharp and surprising. Without the soothing hit of constant digital noise, my mind wandered into corners I didn't recognize. I noticed patterns, like the way my thoughts sped up whenever I felt even a hint of boredom, or how silence made my breathing louder than I liked. Every quiet moment felt stretched thin, revealing things I usually drowned in scrolling. It was strange, almost embarrassing to confront how lost I felt without something to distract me from myself. Stepping outside, the world looked the same but felt different. People walked with their eyes glued to screens, fingers dancing across glowing glass. I watched them for the first time in years without joining in, and something inside me twisted. It wasn't judgment. It was a strange ache. A part of me felt invisible, like I had left the shared current everyone else was swimming in. A group of teenagers laughed as they filmed something. A woman scrolled as she crossed the street. A man typed while walking his dog. Each glowing screen looked like a tiny portal pulling everyone forward. I realized how deeply I had lived inside that pull. Without it, I felt like I had stepped out of a crowd into a quiet, abandoned corner where everything sounded sharper, from footsteps on pavement to the wind brushing along the buildings. When I returned home, I tried to sit still, but the quiet felt almost overwhelming. It wasn't the peaceful silence people romanticize. It was the kind that exposes every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft settling of the walls, the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I realized how long it had been since I allowed myself to simply exist without noise guiding my attention. The stillness pressed against me, not harshly, but insistently, asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. I tried to breathe slowly, but even my breath sounded too loud. In that moment, I understood that silence wasn't empty at all. It was full, and everything inside it was something I had been avoiding. It was the first moment I truly felt the weight of what I had decided to do. The restlessness came slowly at first, like a soft tapping inside my chest, then grew into something sharper, something that crawled under my skin. Every quiet corner of the apartment felt louder than it should. I paced without meaning to, picking things up only to put them back down again. I kept thinking of reaching for my phone, not to check anything specific, but to escape this strange discomfort rising in me. The silence no longer felt like an empty room. It felt like someone following me, waiting for me to stop moving so it could sit across from me again. I realized withdrawal wasn't just about screens. It was about everything I used to bury under them. Thoughts, memories, fears. And now, without distractions, all of them were waking up, stretching their arms, and demanding attention I didn't know how to give. The apartment seemed to grow louder the longer I stayed inside. The hum of the refrigerator felt like a low drone in my spine. The ticking clock a constant reminder of how slowly time moved, without the chaos of endless updates. I found myself noticing tiny sounds I had never heard before. The faint buzz of the heater, the whisper of fabric when I shifted, the soft vibration of pipes behind the walls. It was unsettling how alive the room felt when I wasn't drowning it out with noise. Every sound carried meaning, like the apartment was speaking a language I had ignored for years. And yet, beneath it all, there was an older, deeper, quiet waiting for me. A quiet I wasn't ready to approach, but couldn't run from anymore. As the hours passed, I became aware of my breathing in a way that felt almost intrusive. Each inhale sounded louder than the last, as if it were pushing its way into the room. I had spent so long drowning myself in noise that I'd forgotten what it was like to actually hear my body living. The rise and fall of my chest felt strangely unfamiliar, almost vulnerable. A rhythm I had taken for granted now demanded acknowledgement. Without the constant rush of scrolling, there was nothing to shield me from the raw hum of being alive. It was unsettling, but also grounding, like discovering an instrument I didn't know I carried, one that had been playing beneath the noise all along. Conversations felt different without the option to retreat into my phone. When my mind wandered or discomfort crept in, I couldn't hide behind a screen. I had to sit with the unease, with the awkward pauses and the weight of real presence. Talking to people suddenly required more of me, more eye contact, more intention, more honesty. It felt vulnerable, almost exposed, to not have a digital escape route. I noticed how often I used my phone as a shield, something to fill the spaces where emotions might surface. Now, face-to-face interactions felt slower, heavier, but strangely more meaningful. Like I was finally showing up for conversations I had only half-lived before. By evening, the first real memory surfaced, the kind I had kept buried beneath years of noise. It rose quietly, without warning, slipping through the cracks of silence. I tried to push it away, but the stillness around me held it in place, insisting that I look. The memory wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simple. Small, but it carried weight. A moment I had ignored for so long it hardened to something sharp. Sitting with it felt like touching a bruise I had forgotten about. I realized then that silence wasn't punishing me. It was offering a space to finally see the things I had run from. The things that shaped me more than any notification ever had. I kept telling myself I was fine, that the discomfort would fade if I just stayed busy. But the truth kept following me like a shadow that refused to be ignored. I realized how deeply I had depended on noise, not just to feel connected, but to avoid looking at parts of myself I didn't want to face. Every moment of silence peeled back another layer, showing me how many emotions I had muted under the constant chatter of screens. Without distraction, the world felt sharper, but so did the things inside me. It wasn't the apps I missed. It was the escape they offered. And now, stripped of that escape, I stood in front of the truth with nothing to hide behind. The flashbacks arrived without permission, quick, sharp, and unsettling. I remembered moments I had ignored for years, conversations where I pretended to be fine, feelings I stuffed behind a smile, choices I made only because noise made it easy not to think. Silence was showing me every part of myself I had blurred. It was strange how memories could hide beneath notifications, how emotions could wait patiently until the world finally went quiet. I felt exposed, as if the silence had opened a door in my mind that had been locked for too long. These memories weren't here to punish me. They were here to be acknowledged, but facing them felt like standing barefoot on cracked ground. I didn't know where to begin, so I started with the smallest corner of my home, a tiny space between the bookshelf and the wall. It felt easier to clean something external than to face what was happening inside me. But as I picked up old papers, empty boxes, and things I had kept for no real reason, I felt something shift. Clearing the space wasn't just about tidying. It was like creating a small patch of air where my mind could breathe. Each object I let go of felt like shedding a layer I no longer needed. The silence didn't feel as threatening in that moment. Instead, it stood beside me, patient and steady, giving me room to understand myself without running. I needed fresh air, so I walked to the lake near my apartment. The water was calm, almost glass-like, reflecting the sky with a stillness I envied. That's where I met him. Elias. He sat on a bench carved from old wood, hands resting loosely in his lap. He nodded as I approached, the kind of quiet acknowledgement that felt sincere. We didn't speak at first. We just watched the water ripple gently under the breeze. Something about his presence felt grounding, like he belonged to a slower world I was only beginning to understand. And without screens, without noise, I found myself drawn to the simplicity of that moment, to the rare comfort of being near someone who didn't demand anything from me. After a few minutes, Elias turned to me and asked a question so simple it felt like stepping into cold water. He asked, "What are you really trying to hear in the silence?" The words hit harder than I expected. No one had ever asked me that before. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. The truth felt too delicate, too unformed to speak aloud. I realized then that silence wasn't just about removing noise. It was about allowing myself to listen. Really listen. To the things I kept pushing away. His question echoed inside me long after I left, settling into a place I had avoided for far too long. The next morning, something inside me shifted. For the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an opening. I reached for a notebook I hadn't touched in years, its pages yellowed at the edges, filled with half-finished thoughts from a version of me I barely remembered. My handwriting looked unfamiliar, like a stranger had lived in my body before noise took over. I began writing, slowly at first, then faster as the words started forming truths I hadn't spoken out loud. The quiet around me didn't press anymore. It held me like a gentle hand on my back. As the ink moved across the page, I realized I wasn't writing to document anything. I was writing to hear myself again without the filter of a screen telling me how to feel. As days passed, I noticed my apartment beginning to reflect the calm I was slowly finding inside myself. I started removing things without ceremony. Old clothes, forgotten keepsakes, objects I kept out of habit rather than meaning. The more space I created, the easier it felt to breathe. It wasn't about having a perfect home. It was about removing the weight of things that no longer felt like me. Each empty corner, each clear surface became a quiet reminder that I didn't need as much as I once thought. I wasn't trying to erase my life. I was trying to uncover it, peeling away layers built from noise, impulse, and the fear of sitting with myself. And with each item gone, the silence felt less like a void and more like a companion. One afternoon, I left my headphones at home. It was unintentional at first, but when I realized it, I didn't turn back. The world sounded different without a barrier between us. I heard the soft scuff of my shoes on the sidewalk, the wind threading through bare branches, the distant laughter of strangers. It was overwhelming at first, almost too vivid. But then it settled into something beautiful. I wasn't rushing to fill the quiet. I was part of it. Every sound felt connected to a larger rhythm I had ignored for years. Without the constant hum of curated noise in my ears, I felt like I was walking through the world for the first time, fully awake to every subtle detail. For the first time in a long time, I stopped multitasking. I washed dishes without checking messages. I cooked a meal without music in the background. I folded clothes slowly, letting each movement exist by itself, instead of blending into a rush of distractions. It felt strange at first, almost too slow, like time had thickened, but the more I leaned into it, the more I realized how much of my life I had lived in fragments. Half present, half somewhere else. Doing one thing at a time wasn't just peaceful. It was grounding. It reminded me that simplicity wasn't emptiness. It was presence. And presence was something I had been starving for without even knowing. That evening, something unexpected happened. I laughed, softly, almost shyly, at the silence. Not because it was funny, but because I suddenly understood it differently. The quiet wasn't chasing me or cornering me. It was simply there, steady and open, waiting for me to stop running. For the first time, the stillness felt gentle, even warm. I realized that silence had never been the enemy. My avoidance had. As I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, I felt a small but certain sense of ease settle into my chest. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a new beginning. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time I felt ready to listen. As the days passed, clarity began arriving in small, surprising ways. It wasn't a sudden revelation or a dramatic moment. It was noticing little patterns I had ignored for years, how I reached for distraction whenever I felt a flicker of sadness, how I checked my phone whenever I doubted myself, how I kept filling empty spaces instead of learning to sit with them. Silence was showing me things with a quiet honesty I had never allowed before. It was uncomfortable but illuminating. I started seeing my habits not as flaws, but as signals. Each impulse to escape carried a message I had never listened to. And slowly, I began to understand that the noise I constantly surrounded myself with wasn't protecting me. It was numbing. With the noise gone, my senses felt sharper, almost tender. I noticed the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the crisp scent of morning air through the window, the distant murmur of footsteps in the hallway. Food tasted different, fuller, richer. Even the sound of my own breath carried a calm rhythm I hadn't recognized before. It was like waking up in my own life after living half asleep for years. Every detail felt new, like the world had been waiting patiently for me to pay attention. I realized I had spent so much time looking at screens that I had forgotten how to feel the world with my whole body. And now, each simple sensation felt like a small gift handed back to me. I began noticing the sky more often, its shifting colors, its moods, its silence. It felt strange how something so vast had gone unnoticed in my daily life. I had been so focused on tiny glowing rectangles that I forgot to look up. One morning, the sky carried a soft wash of pastel blue and pink, and I stood there longer than I expected, breathing in a sense of calm I couldn't explain. I realized the world had always been offering me beauty, but noise made me blind to it. The sky became a reminder of how much I had missed, and each time I looked up, I felt a little lighter, as if the weight I carried wasn't entirely mine. When I finally met Lila for coffee, I felt the contrast between us more clearly than ever. She talked fast, her words bright and filled with stories from the online world I had stepped away from. I listened, feeling both distant and grounded. There was a time when her energy pulled me in, when I shaped my choices around what would look good in her world of constant sharing. But now, I noticed how much I had changed. The silence inside me wasn't fragile anymore. It was steady. When she asked why I disappeared for so long, I told her I needed space. Not from her, but from everything. She laughed lightly, not fully understanding, but she squeezed my hand. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need her to understand. I just needed to be honest. It wasn't until I sat alone later that night that I finally understood what silence had been trying to show me. The fear I carried wasn't about emptiness. It was about the truths hidden inside it. I had been afraid of meeting the parts of myself I had ignored, The loneliness I never admitted, the emotions I pressed down, the memories I avoided. Silence didn't create those things. It revealed them. And now, instead of running, I felt ready to face them. I realized silence wasn't a void. It was a mirror. And in its reflection, I saw a version of myself I had been too busy, too distracted, too frightened to meet. But she was still there, waiting for me to come home. Mornings became slower in a way that felt almost sacred. I stopped rushing out of bed as if the world needed something from me. Instead, I let myself wake gently, listening to the quiet creak of the apartment, the soft rustle of blankets, the steady rhythm of my own breath. It felt like reclaiming time I hadn't realized I'd been giving away. I made tea without checking a clock. I sat by the window just to feel the warmth of sunlight brushing across my skin. These simple moments weren't dramatic, but they carried a tenderness I had never given myself. I started to understand that slowing down wasn't laziness, it was presence. And for the first time, morning didn't feel like the start of a race. It felt like an invitation. My conversations with Elias became a quiet anchor in my life. There was something grounding about his presence, steady, thoughtful, patient. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words felt honest, as if he had carved them from a slower, quieter place inside himself. Sitting beside him never felt like performing. It felt like resting. We met at the lake, often, sharing long stretches of silence without needing to fill them. It was strange how natural it felt to exist beside someone without noise. I didn't know what to call the connection forming between us, but I knew it wasn't rushed. It wasn't loud. It was something steady, unfolding at its own pace, teaching me that not everything needed to be chased to be meaningful. With more clarity came the uncomfortable task of redefining what success meant to me. I realized how much of my self-worth had been tied to being seen, to posting, sharing, achieving things that looked impressive rather than felt meaningful. Without the constant evaluation of likes and comments, I was forced to ask myself what I actually valued. It wasn't numbers or attention. It was quiet purpose, small joys, doing things because they mattered to me, not because they looked good through a screen. Success began to feel less like a destination and more like the ability to live truthfully. And truthfully, I'd been chasing the wrong things for a long time. Letting go of my digital identity felt like shedding a version of myself I'd carried for years without realizing its weight. I deleted old posts, archived photos that no longer felt true, and removed pieces of myself I had crafted for applause. It wasn't sadness that filled me, but relief. I had lived in a constant performance, shaping my image to match expectations I didn't even remember agreeing to. Without that digital echo, I felt strangely lighter, like stepping out of a costume I had forgotten I was wearing. I didn't lose anything real. I simply cleared space for the version of myself that had been quietly growing beneath the noise. One night, I sat in the center of my living room with no music, no scrolling, no distractions, just myself in the quiet. And for the first time, silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. The fear that once tightened around my chest dissolved into something warm and gentle. I could sit with my thoughts without running. I could breathe without rushing. I wasn't waiting for noise to save me anymore. I realized that silence wasn't empty at all. It was full of things I had spent years trying to avoid, but also full of comfort I had never given myself the chance to feel. In that moment, I understood something simple and true. I wasn't afraid of silence. I was afraid of what it would reveal. And now, I was ready. When the 100th day approached, I felt something I never expected: gratitude. The quiet that once terrified me had become a place of understanding. A space where I could finally hear myself without distortion. There was no countdown, no anticipation of going back to the way things were. Instead, I felt a soft sense of closure, like finishing a chapter I didn't know I needed. The journey hadn't been clean or simple. It had been messy, uncomfortable, and full of truths I had avoided for years. But now, standing in the stillness I once feared, I felt stronger, not louder, not more visible, just clearer. I realized the silence never tried to break me. It tried to return me to myself. Silence didn't feel like an empty room anymore. It felt like a companion, steady and patient. I found myself savoring small moments. The quiet hum of the heater, the soft scrape of a chair on the floor, the warmth of sunlight touching my face. I realized that the world hadn't changed. I had. The parts of myself I once buried had become softer, easier to hold. Gratitude seeped into places where fear used to live. I no longer rushed through my days. I walked slower, breathed deeper, and let myself feel things fully. And in that gentle awareness, I began to understand that stillness wasn't just something I learned. It was something I had been missing all my life. On the day the challenge ended, I picked up my phone with careful hands, almost as if I were touching something fragile. For the first time, there was no rush of excitement or fear, just curiosity. I didn't want to disappear from the world forever. I just wanted a different relationship with it. The quiet inside me felt strong enough now to hold its own. I stared at the dark screen for a long moment, realizing how much of my life I had once poured into its glow. Now, I wasn't returning to old habits. I was choosing something new, something slower, something honest. I turned it on not to escape myself, but to see how my life could look when silence came first. I didn't reinstall everything. I only kept what felt necessary, deleting the rest without hesitation. It felt strange at first, like trimming branches from an overgrown tree. But each app I removed created more space, more calm. I realized how much of my digital world had been built out of habit, rather than intention. Now, I wanted my choices to reflect who I was becoming, not who I used to be. The silence inside me felt too precious to hand back to anything that didn't honor it. This wasn't about restriction. It was about alignment. And for the first time, my digital life felt like something I was shaping rather than something shaping me. That night, I sat by the window and let the silence settle around me like a warm blanket. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Silence had become a place of truth, a space where I could hear the parts of myself I once hid behind noise. I didn't need constant connection to feel whole. I didn't need endless distraction to feel alive. What I needed was presence, my own. I looked out at the quiet city, its lights flickering softly, and felt a deep sense of calm rise in my chest. The journey had changed me in ways I couldn't have predicted. I didn't just discover why I feared silence. I discovered what it could give me. And now, I knew I would never run from it again.